Ready? All right, Baltimore City Council, Budget and Appropriations Committee. I'm Councilman Eric Costello from the 11th District, Chair of the committee. I'm joined to my left by Councilman Leon Pinkett, 7th District, Vice Chair of the committee. To his left, Council President Brandon Scott. To his left, Councilwoman Danielle McCray, 2nd District, Councilwoman Shannon Sneed, 13th District, and Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th District. We are joined by Matt Stegman, representing Mayor Jack Young. We have staff from Council President Scott's office floating around in here. To my immediate rights, Marguerite Curran, staff to the committee. With that, Mr. Commissioner, we are here for Legislative Oversight LO 19-0060, Budget Oversight Hearing for the Baltimore City Police Department. I'm going to turn it over to you. If you could please limit your presentation to approximately 10 minutes, that would be greatly appreciated.
I'll absolutely be shorter than 10 minutes. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and other members of the committee for allowing me and my team to come before you tonight. I'd like to start with our staffing and recruiting updates. As of today, we have 2,461 sworn members, including trainees and cadets among our current future sworn personnel. So with a budget of 2,661 sworn positions, that leaves 200 sworn vacancies. We're also budgeted for 588 civilian positions, and we currently have 533 non-sworn members, leaving 55 vacancies that we're actively working to fill. One of the best practices that we have just implemented is the creation of our Administrative Duties Division, which is a centralized chain of command for all personnel who are on limited duty or long-term medical status. We identified 113 personnel who are distributed throughout the department, and we announced that effective October 13th, they will be transferred to the Administrative Duties Division, and then their overtime and secondary employment authorization would be significantly restricted. Amazingly, since that order went out a week ago, we've had 19 limited duty personnel from that list who are now saying they're available for full duty status. That result is absolutely outstanding. We will continue to actively manage these members so that we are ensuring they're staying on the path to getting better and getting well and returning to work as soon as possible. Now, the next slide outlines where we are with recruitment and retention this year. We have seen 151 sworn members leave the department in 2019, but this is actually the lowest average monthly separation rate we've seen in 6 years. We're on track to having between 13% and 17% reduction in the attrition levels compared to 2018. Recruitment continues to be a challenge, but I'm encouraged by the number of applications we are now seeing as a result of our improved recruitment and marketing campaign. We're planning to extend this campaign through June of 2020 using state dollars that have been earmarked for police recruitment. On to the overtime slides. The department I walked into had little to no financial controls in place when it comes to overtime. I'm proud to announce that we have now hired a chief financial officer who is here with my team today, Shala Graham. Thank you. Who has been instrumental in creating the controls that are needed to ensure we are being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars. As we've discussed at the last hearing, I've learned that there was a significant lack of oversight on who used overtime, why they used overtime, and no protocols for establishing or tracking any benefit from the overtime. There have been historical perspective from the inside and outside of the agency that if we significantly reduce the overtime, it would hurt the crime fight. But as you'll see, we've significantly reduced the overtime and the crime fight has not been negatively impacted. We were thoughtful and strategic about how we approached the reductions. First, we implemented a responsible and proactive overtime policy. To refresh your memories regarding the policy, we started out by reinforcing the established limit on the amount of hours officers could work. Number one, no more than 75 hours will be worked per week. It's inclusive of regular tour of duty and all overtime and secondary employment. Number two, no more than 32 cumulative hours of overtime and or secondary employment during the week. And number three, absent any emergency situations or supervisory approval, all members shall have at least 7 consecutive hours of off time within a 24-hour period because it's about officer wellness. We also started tracking which districts are complying with those standards and teaching commanders to think strategically about how, where, when, and why they should deploy overtime resources. As you can see from these slides, we are now below the target level of overtime spending per payroll period that we need to be to stay within or below budget. With a department that has a number of sworn vacancies we have, overtime resources will continue to be needed to flex the size of the department to secure the city. We will continue to maintain our controls going forward and continue demonstrating a responsible use of the taxpayer dollar for our efforts and report out on our progress week to week. And again, I thank the council and I thank you for your time and attention. My team and I are here to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. What's your guys' names again? Can you just say to us, the CTO?
Chief Technology Officer Edward Woody Davis.
Mr. Davis, and ma'am, what was
Yes, it's Charlotte Graham, CFO, Chief Financial Officer.
Shiler?
Charlotte,
Sha-
yes.
Shala Graham.
Yes, that's correct, sir.
Ms. Graham and Mr. Davis, right? Got it. God bless you. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Commissioner, can you go back to this slide 14, effective October 13th? You identified 113 personnel on light duty and medical status, and 19 of them decided they were ready to return to service?
What's the number right now?
It was 19 this morning. It is now 25 departmental-wide as of this evening.
So when you say you identified them, did you already knew they were on? Or can someone clarify?
Just to clarify, Eric Melanson, Chief of Staff for the Baltimore Police Department. Just to clarify, what we are doing now is instituting a best practice, which is a lot of police departments, they actually centralize everyone into a single command so that they can keep track of who is on light duty and who is on medical. Before we entered into the department, however, that was not the practice that was generally done for folks who were on light duty. Light duty members were distributed at commands throughout the department, and so they fell under the operational control over whatever major or, over captain or whoever they were reporting to. Under this structure, however, they all are now reporting to Major Roden. And part of that identification was going through all the light duty rosters throughout the entire department. You've seen in the past, perhaps, when we talk about staffing numbers throughout the districts, about those that are fully staffed or fully capable versus numbers that are on the roster. That differential, in large part, is this light duty piece. We are now moving those individuals into a centralized locator code so that we can make certain that we're keeping track of them. The very act of doing that, apparently, has led to a number of individuals to provide information to the major and to the administration that they are, in fact, able to come back to full duty.
So just so I think I understand, so before it was decentralized, so their locator code, let's say, if there were 5 injured officers,
Sure.
would be in the Southern District,
Sure.
but the major in the Southern District is busy running their district and
Yes.
not encouraging people who are injured or on light duty to return to service. You've now centralized that, and you've somehow recaptured over 20% of those officers in like a week period.
Well, 25 out of 113, a little bit more than that. But yeah, that's right. That's about right.
That is absolutely outstanding. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There's really nothing else to say about that. For the, actually, I'm gonna skip to anyone else who has questions. I'll come back. Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Actually, can I add
yeah,
one
go
more
ahead.
thing? The overtime numbers are absolutely outstanding as well. We have been complaining about this on the council for years now. We have been waiting for the day that you would come in here, or one of your predecessors would come in here and explain that we have figured out how to get a handle on overtime. And I just going to defer to the young lady from BBMR. I'm assuming that finance is happy with this outcome, and this is on a track that you would like to see.
Sure. Rachel's in from the finance department. So my boss, budget director, Bob Senemy, did actually use the word happy. Please don't tell him that I told anyone that, but he did. Yeah, we are pleased. We're pleased both with the policy controls and with the budget that we worked with the police department to prepare to actually create a more realistic budget by unit for overtime hours as well as dollars so that individual command staff can be held accountable.
In 5 years of knowing Mr. Seneme and working with him, I've never heard him use such a pleasant or optimistic term to describe what an agency is doing with respect to overtime. So whatever you are doing absolutely correctly. and I hope that we continue to see more of it. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Look, I give the credit to this amazing team, Councilmember.
Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I didn't even know happy was in Director Seneme's vocabulary, so
Much trouble now.
we're going to remind him of that when he comes in the next hearing. And I just want, I don't want to belabor the point, but I want to reiterate the fact of what Councilman Costello said. The overtime spending was the whole reason that we started doing these hearings. And for too long, I'm not talking about personalities, it seemed as though our points of contention about overtime weren't being taken seriously. So I just want to commend you. I know that you deferred to your team, but I want to commend you and your leadership for making certain that this was a priority for your department, and we do appreciate it.
Thank you. I knew this was a very important thing, and I know that before I could come back to you to ask for your support and your colleagues' support on any other issue, we had to demonstrate fiscal responsibility and good, proper, strong management in our department to just be good stewards of what is already budgeted for us. And so though we have seen this downward trend, we have now, absent really good technology, at least built the human capital to know
Yes.
week to week and week to week what we should be spending and stay under that with the accountability measures in place to make sure that that is done with what should be done when people don't adhere to it. And at the last hearing, I told you we were building that, and we're pleased to come back to demonstrate that.
Thank you, sir. So I just had one question, and unfortunately, it's not related to any of the slides that are part of the current presentation, but refers back to the last hearing that we had. And it's a slide related to the pre- and post-marketing campaign kickoff as it relates to the hiring process. And I know you don't have this in front of you, but I noticed that there were different categories for where individuals or applicants fell in the process of hiring, and it ranges from either failing the written test or pending written test or pending taking the physical agility test. And the reason I brought it up is I had a conversation with Maryland Transit Authority Police, and what they relayed to me is that some of their success in hiring is making certain that when we get somebody in, that we give them as many tests as possible so that we're not having them come back. And so I'm not familiar with our process. Can you kind of talk a little bit about it? Do we follow that same practice as far as when we do get somebody in, that they are taking as many tests as possible so that we don't lose them in the midst of this hiring process?
That is a consideration that we work on to make sure especially people who perhaps have to travel to Baltimore to help facilitate the hiring process, that we minimize the amount of time it takes to go through written tests, the agility test. And so those are things that we look at. We created what's called RecruitStat, and the RecruitStat, the biweekly RecruitStat looks at all of that data to try to figure out what are the barriers, what do we have to overcome? What are the successes? How many cases does each individual investigator have? What's the timeline and turnaround time for each individual turning around cases, so that we can produce a pool of applicants to hire and then shrink the time that we do that. And looking at burden reductions, just like we look at burden reductions for calls for service. How do we free up time for officers to get to you faster, have more time for community policing? We're always assessing how we free up time in the investigations and how we shrink that process without compromising the integrity of it. So those are things we look at. We're not at the point where we can consolidate it all, but we're always with the RecruitStat and the innovation team in the Mayor's Office of Innovation looking at how we make that better. One of the things we did is bring that RecruitStat process here, and now it's evolving. And I think the next iteration of that is how do we consolidate when a person is in City Hall and in the city taking a test, how do we get it all done?
Right. Okay.
And that is how we compete against our competitors to get hires, yes.
Yeah, I'm just making certain that we're looking at that. Appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Colleagues? Councilman Burnett?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had just a general request. And it was builds on my question from the last time around recruitment and retention. I'd ask that the formatting of data that we get from hearing to hearing remain the same. Because I know that this particular chart looked different last month. There was different information on hiring data that's not on this chart this month. And I just think for continuity, it would be incredibly helpful that, we can, I appreciate the year data. I appreciate everything that you're giving to us. This is way more information that we were getting before. But it would just be, for me, it's a little bit confusing because I'm looking for the same data from the last month so I can compare and prepare questions accordingly. So I would just throw it in as a request just for a little continuity there.
Yeah, Councilman, if you could get me the data points that are missing, and Michelle, I'll work with you and Andy to make sure that we're, just consistent. And I know we had a template that Jim and I had put together maybe a year ago when we first started these. And then I think we realized we included a little too much information, and it was the beginning, so we were kind of testing it out, which is fine. And then we kind of streamlined it a little bit. Maybe we don't have quite enough, but you let me know what we're missing.
Yeah, and I'll put in requests for what I'm looking for the next hearing. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, shoot me an email so I
We
have it.
absolutely want to make sure we're being consistent. One of the things we did last time was highlight the new recruitment campaign and the kind of the before and after stats that we had. And so when we were looking at trying to brief for this hearing, we removed that slide because it didn't seem like it was something we could continue to track the way that we were tracking it. So we were trying to make sure that it would be consistent. But of course, any data requests that you have as relates to that, we're open to providing. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, can you talk to me a little bit about the timeline for the RMS RFI?
Chief Technology Officer Edward Davis. So the RFI has been issued via City Buy.
It has or it has not?
It has. It is currently in City Buy. It has been there for 2 weeks. The close date for that is October 21st. After October 21st, then we're going to go through a evaluation process and move towards an award of a contract to one of the vendors that will meet our needs in terms of RMS. That time frame, we're looking at April 2020 for the final award of the RMS contract, and at that point, we'll be moving forward with implementation.
How long do we expect for implementation? I imagine that varies from vendor to vendor, but can you give me a broad estimate?
That's a great question. I've been asked that several times, and you actually answered the question for me. It's very difficult to determine because we haven't really talked to the vendors. And the vendors are going to come to us and present some timelines that they have used where they have deployed this in other locations, other municipalities. So we can go and ask other municipalities on some of the timelines they've encountered in terms of deployment to get more detailed information. But until we actually sit down with a vendor, I would not want to commit to any type of timeline. I think that would be a little bit.
Isn't it fair to say the vendor has to come and do the infrastructure assessment here? Before
Absolutely. That's a part of it. Absolutely.
So I would imagine at some point in the process, and Chief, I don't know if you all went through this in New Orleans during your time there, but at some point in the process, you'll reach out to other municipalities so that you have a good idea
Yes.
of how long this takes, so that you're able to determine whether the vendors are shooting straight.
But one thing they do is once we have a vendor, the vendor will then have references. And the references will be other chiefs and other departments.
Sure.
For example, in just a couple of weeks, I'll be in Chicago at the International Chiefs of Police Conference, Major City Chiefs Joint Conference, and all of the vendors will be there. They know we are looking for this, but they will have references, and there will be other departments that they can bring us to give live demonstrations of what the company did for that agency, and we can see live demonstrations, and they can come back and then build what's uniquely for Baltimore.
Got it. And the RMS is being funded, is that the $7 million bucket of money from the state that was fenced off?
So actually, there's several different funding components. It's a combination of federal grants. We've actually received a grant from, it's called the NIBRS compliance program, and that's going to help us bring it to a different updated standard beyond the UCR standard. That's a $2.8 million grant that we received from the federal government. We're happy about that. That helps defray our costs. That can be put towards implementation of the RMS. We're looking at a component of the state funds, the $7 million, about 1.5, towards data cleanup, which is absolutely necessary to get us into a place where we can actually then use a brand new system and do it in an effective way. The other piece has already been identified by the council through capital technology funding, and so that's a piece, about $4.4 million, that we have set aside. So the combination of those resources, we believe, will be sufficient for us to be able to deploy the RMS.
We're looking at approximately $7 million.
About $7 million, $7 to $8 million, actually.
Okay. Do we know how many vendors bid so far or submitted?
We have 11 individuals and organizations that have downloaded
Okay.
the RFI, which is an indication of interest in responding. And of those 11, 3 are industry considered, top tier providers of RMS services.
Okay, but no, we don't know how many have submitted.
The submittals are not due until October 21st.
Okay.
So they're going to wait till October 21st to give us their response.
Okay. Moving forward, I'd like this to be a slide dedicated to this as we move through this, because I know how important this is to your future success. So, okay. Colleagues? Any other questions? One last thing. Where are we at with auxiliary police department, or auxiliary police?
Introduce our newly promoted Lieutenant Colonel.
Oh. Former Major Brown.
Yes.
How are you, ma'am?
So currently we have 10 active auxiliary police. We have 7 that is now waiting for academy dates. So we don't have new academy dates just as of yet. So we have 10 that's active and 7 that we're just waiting on, that are signed up waiting to join.
And they're not waiting on a regular police academy date, a special
Yep,
auxiliary?
just a special auxiliary, yep.
Do we have an estimated time frame when we could get that next academy class in?
No, I'll have to check with ENT and see when they're able to give us dates for the programming.
Just make sure we have a comprehensive update on that next month. Auxiliary is of great interest to
We
me.
will. It's actually trying to build up a good number, and I think it's not necessarily, the weight is determined by us, so we can get a good number to actually start a class, so we're not just training 1, 2, or 3 people, but we get a good number. But that's what the digital marketing campaign is partly about also. It's not just recruits. It's also designed to attract cadets, and working with schools and working with that digital marketing campaign to attract cadets to the cadet program as well.
Yeah, the recruiting campaign is excellent. I don't recall recently having received anything in terms of cadet promotional materials for cadet recruitment or auxiliary recruitment. So if you guys could please send that to me so I can disseminate that to the council, because we all want to be supportive in helping you.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was actually meeting with the digital marketing managers that we contracted with, we do have a dedicated cadet flavored set of social media deliverables that are used to target folks for the cadet program. But it's not quite seeing the kind of outputs that we would expect on the actually application side. So we're actually going back to the table to try to figure out how can we retool this, because we have enough data at this point that we're trying to make sure that those kinds of efforts are much better targeted than what we're seeing now. We're seeing a lot of success with bringing in adult applicants for police, but we have to do something different with the cadet side, because we're not quite hitting the mark on applications for cadets as a result of the campaign. So I just want to put that out there. But that's something we're actively working on and retooling.
Yeah, if you could get us the promotional materials and social media and all that
Will.
for cadets and auxiliary before the next monthly hearing, that would be greatly appreciated.
See you right
we all
away.
want to support you and start pushing that out. Colleagues, any other questions? We're now in recess until next month. Thank you.
Thank you.